Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blue Star Rising, the Templar Awakening. Michael Henry Dunn here, and I am so pleased to be able to introduce the special guest who is joining Reverend Maia Nartoomid and myself this week. Our dear friend, the remarkable Vedic teacher and healer, and also Templar Dame, Alx Uttermann, joining us from Los Angeles. Welcome, Alx. Hello.
Hi. Hello, Michael. Hello, Maya.
All right. Do you want to share with us what the background we're seeing behind you is?
Yeah, sure. So this is a beautiful photograph of there's a Jesus temple, and that was created, I think, in 2001, if I'm not utterly off, which I might be, in Penukonda in India, which is a beautiful power place in South India. A whole ashram and temple setting that's built on the place where Jesus himself spent many, many, many years of his life, both pre and post crucifixion. And you can see the statue right behind me is a living statue of Christ. That's to say his whole presence is there. And when you walk in that room, which is quite a large room, you can feel he's completely there. I thought he was appropriate for today's discussion.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. A lot of our audience is actually already familiar with you, Alx, but it would be great if you would like to just share with us a little bit about your life, your studies, your work, your background in both in India and, of course, with our beautiful subject today, the Feast of Mary Magdalene. This is actually being recorded on the 21st, but we will be sharing this with everyone on the 22nd. So if you want to give a little bit of your story, it would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So, where to start? I think it's fair to say that most of my life was a mystical journey and deep relationship with Jesus, mostly without my conscious awareness. And woven through that has been Magdalene as well. I was raised in rural Missouri. I went to Catholic school, even though I was the only non-Catholic in the history of the whole school. And going to Mass 3 days a week for 8 years. And I really loved it, actually. I loved the whole Catholicism, and I loved the feeling in the church. It was an old French church. That area was settled by the French. It was part of the Louisiana Purchase, so there's a lot of history there. And I kept having mystical experiences with Christ. And in pretty short order, I think I was probably in my teens I had to take the Catholic religion classes, even though, again, I was not Catholic. I wasn't even Christian. But Magdalene started jumping off the page to me and showing things that were a little unusual. And as you know, I was so desperate to be a normal teenager, whatever that means, that I really didn't know where to put these experiences. And there was really no one who spoke about these kinds of things. So I just kind of compartmentalized it and ignored it. And relegated mystical experiences to the category of, oh, well, that's interesting, but so what? I'm going to go and party with my friends, that kind of thing. So it wasn't until many years later that I could look back on my life and see at every turn how present and how prominent the Jesus energy and the consciousness was, and also, of course, right next to it, Mary Magdalene in many cases. So it's been an adventure on that level. And I honestly have to say, I would have characterized myself as an agnostic at best through most of my teenage years and into my 20s. And it wasn't really until, again, the mystical side of my being started expressing itself that I started recognizing, oh, there's more to it than there seems to be in this creation. And maybe there is some sort of creative force or whatever. And it hit me full on when I met a young miraculous healing saint named Sri Kaleshwar, who, when I met him in 1999, he was the ripe old age of 27 years old. And he was very intense. He was super fierce and divine. And didn't have much English. In fact, his English was highly creative. But what he did have was the Shakti. He had the miracle abilities writ large and was demonstrating the same things that Jesus did. Really, like in your face, miraculous healings, terminal cancers disappearing in a few minutes, HIV, AIDS disappearing. He was doing this to demonstrate God's power through the miracles. He was manifesting objects out of thin air. He was manifesting ash to heal people, giving the objects that he would manifest to his students so that they could carry the healing energy forward in the world. And his stance was, yeah, I have miracle abilities. It's true. So does everybody. And anyone who's willing to do the hard work to really learn exactly the mechanisms, I'm willing to teach it. Wow. So that was revelation. I was then in my early 30s, and I thought, this I have been waiting for. This I want. To me, spirituality, I was by then something of a healer. I would say a flailing healer. A make it up as you go, seat of your pants, something's happening healer. And I had a lot of questions about, well, what works and what doesn't work, and how come this works and how come that doesn't work, and why is it that some people feel energy very strongly when I would transfer it to them, and why some people don't. And nobody in the traditions that I knew, which were mostly Reiki and breath work, had any idea. Like, they couldn't answer these questions, and they would fall back on these kind of lame Hallmark card responses of, well, the energy takes care of it, and blah, blah. I'm like, oh, so you don't actually know how this works. Then comes someone who not only is full force with the miracle energy, but is offering to teach step by step, A through Z. This is how it works. And this is how every mystic who's demonstrated these kinds of healing abilities has learned it. There's only one doorway, and it's the same doorway, regardless of tradition. Sign me up. So that's how I ended up in India for many, many years, studying the miracles and being immersed in an environment where miraculous healing was the order of the day, and learning the tools and the techniques and the mechanisms of how the creation operates from the inside, from not even Kaleshwar's own knowledge. He would always say, I'm not making this up. This is not my crazy. These are the documented mechanisms from ancient manuscripts of India, where the ancient rishis, the great seers, I often reflect that the English word researcher or research comes from rishi. It's such an obvious link. The rishis themselves, these high consciousness characters on this planet, in physical form, have been researching since the dawn of creation. What is this creation? And they were kind enough to write it down. And they wrote down exactly the formulas, A through Z, how the energy operates and how to make it practically usable in this planet. Energy, meaning different flavors and strands of the energy. Who is the Mother Divine? How does she operate? What differentiates her quality and her energies from the Divine Masculine? How does that operate? How does the Maya or the illusion of this planet operate? And how to negotiate with it. All this they wrote down. They wrote down exact healing formulas. If someone has cancer, you try this. If someone is extraordinarily heartbroken, depressed, anxious, you use these kinds of energies. And Kaleshwar had access to all these manuscripts. So he was teaching us directly from manuscripts that are in some cases 7,000 years old, 5,000 years old, 2,000 years old. So some of them not from this time cycle even, but they exist and they persisted. And so he taught us directly from those things. They're like formulas. You know, many yogis from the Indian tradition have said, well, it's a soul science, right? It's a science. Science means you can replicate something. You can try it, you can see the result. It's like a recipe. You know, if you add X amount of eggs and chocolate and this and that, you get brownies, right? Hopefully. Same thing, you can reproduce it again and again and again. So it's the scientific method, let's say, of how the souls operate. And so that's what we were steeped in, and that's what I spent years in India learning. As a footnote, I want to say, many times over the years, Kaleshwar would be asked by an ardent Christian student, somebody who had come from a very, traditional Christian background, I know you have the same miracle energies that Jesus had. Could you please turn water to wine for me? I really have longed to see that my whole life. And he would say, sure. And they would get a bucket and they would pour bottled water into it, and pretty soon it would be red. And definitely wine, and definitely an extraordinary kind of wine. Not what we would consider wine, but more herbed, I think more of an Ayurvedically prepared wine. So as the years went on in India, he made it very clear that despite the, like the surface appearances of a yogic tradition, that is to say a master with students and having a master before him and a master before him and a master all the way back, which is the tradition. The cornerstone of this healing tradition out of India is Jesus Christ. And what he did as an Indian yogi, what he did as someone who was trained there and learned from these same source materials, these same palm leaf manuscripts. I have pictures of them, I'll show. What he did there is like the biggest untold story on the history of this planet. And turns out a lot of the documentation for what he did there is there in this place called Penukonda, the photo that I have here of the Jesus temple there in Penukonda, and has been preserved for humanity. So that's a huge, more to be revealed kind of story, blockbuster on this planet and its spiritual history, and feels to me like the missing piece that humanity has been waiting for a long time, which is that these consciousness layers and levels can be learned. They're not only relegated to these extraordinary characters like a Jesus, a Buddha, a Muhammad, a Krishna, a Yogananda, a Babaji. No, anyone willing to do the hard work can learn these things. It takes everything. It's not easy, but it's learned. And I feel like that's the big crime that the churches perpetuated on humanity, this crime that there's only one Jesus and everybody else is just a poor sinner who can never achieve that level. No, sorry. Better luck, some other planet. No, it's not true at all. It's complete nonsense. And what Jesus came to do, actually, was to wake everybody up to the same level, which sounds like blasphemy if you came from a Christian tradition. So that's a little of my life and story. And so since the early 2000s, after many years in India, I was there for about 5 years straight with Kalashwar. And since 99, I have been his very serious student. So that's now more than 20 something years. I came back to the US, spent a lot of time teaching and healing and training other healers to do exactly the same things that I learned in India. And in 2007, I think, Jonathan Rosen, my then partner and me, we created UCBK, the organization that I still have today, the Universal Church of Baba's Kitchen, through which we teach and heal and do all these kinds of activities still, carrying the message and the energy of Jesus and the great saints and siddhas of India. So that's a thumbnail.
Just a little cosmic thumbnail. Wow.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Ma.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated by the whole story. Of course, it doesn't surprise me because it's so resonant in my being, and I think both has told me whatever. But, to hear your story, really lived story, and to hear how you came about all of this is just a beautiful sharing. And we're so fortunate to have you share this with us today. So you say you're doing this work as someone who's constantly seeking health remedies. I wonder, do you do healings on people? Or how does it work? I mean, why did I say how does it work? I mean, does a person contact you? And I'm sure you have a feed and whatever. But do you do a healing work on them?
Yes, absolutely. So my work functions on many different levels, actually. I do individual healing sessions for people, and yes, they can be conducted from a distance just as easily as in person. And during these times of COVID-19 now, it's really all via Zoom or at a distance. Hold on 1 minute. I have a crazy...
Yeah.
I live in Los Angeles, so they're always helicopters circling and weird things. Yeah, so I do personal healing sessions via Zoom and at a distance as well as in person. And I also do, how to say it? So I do fire ceremonies, Vedic homas or yagyams, which are, you know, the saints of India, the sages and the rishis, they use the fire element a lot to transform. And to the saints, the fire is like their television set. They look in the fire and they see all the souls who are connected to them. Maybe somebody heard their name, or maybe somebody met that saint, or maybe they're just some person who is praying to God heartfully for relief, and it gets fielded to that saint, you know, to handle that call, as it were. They see it in the fire. And in the fire, they're able to burn the karmas, the negativity, the stress, the illnesses that the people are carrying. So I do every full moon and new moon since 2005, without fail. Fire homas, very powerful fire homas. And those are the vehicle for a lot of healing for a lot of people. Because I know how to work through the fire pretty efficiently now after all these years. So there are many angles and many possibilities of doing the healing work for someone.
And I do want to say that a beautiful sacred Homa ceremony was done here in this very room where I'm sitting by Alx when she visited us in Colorado for the Blue Star Rising conference on applied sacred science back in November of last year. And we have some beautiful footage of that I will drop into this program when we edit it, just to give everybody a little taste of that. Also, of course, at the bottom of the YouTube video, we'll have Alx's website so that you can go right to it and see her work and be in touch with her for exploring an appointment if you wish. So, well, thanks for that. You know, I've heard your story before, of course, but it's beautiful to hear it again and the details that I hadn't heard before.
Oh, yeah, fasten your seatbelt, because the Magdalene is a whole chapter of this. That's like a whole other layer and facet of, you know, I really should have titled my autobiography like How I Spent the Summer of My Life in India. You know, I was like, what I did on my multi-year summer vacation that definitely involves also Mary Magdalene.
Well, then let's start to explore that. You know, I did share with everyone last week that you have conducted pilgrimages to the sacred Magdalene sites in India for small groups of attuned people. You've made your own private pilgrimages to sacred sites which are not necessarily well known to everyone. So, and you will be sharing photographs of this with us. So, shall we dive into that?
Yes, let's do that. So,
okay.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'm sorry to be a little on my personal history, but I think it's germane to the subject. So, I mentioned having experiences with Magdalene and Jesus as a teenager. And one of the first things that I saw in a sophomore high school religion class was we were reading the conventional four gospels from the Christian Bible, and it comes the scene after the resurrection, the crucifixion of Jesus and the resurrection, where Magdalene is the first person who sees him after the crucifixion, and she doesn't recognize him because he's somehow transformed, and mistakes him for a gardener, and he says, "Don't you know who I am, Mary?" And his next words to her are, "Don't touch me, I'm not fooling myself." And in my inner vision, it was the craziest thing, just the video played, that she went to embrace him. And I understand I think I'm about 13, if I'm not mistaken. I'm like, oh my God, they were married. Wow, who knew? They certainly don't talk about that in the church. It was just one of those kind of like, well, that's obvious, isn't it? I saw it. Okay, good. Then years later, I'm in college. I was a musician. I was trained as a classical pianist, which is even more bizarre, but anyway. And I'm in a music class where we're looking at the whole history of of music coming in the Western tradition from monophony, only everything in unison, like Gregorian chanting, to polyphony. And then my music professor, being a world music amazing character, as he's tracing the whole history of music through Europe, he starts playing this music. It's sung, and it sounds like early music meets Arabic. And I'm like, what is this? Every cell in my body is tingling. And these women start singing in, it's an archaic French, it's an old French. I didn't know it was Languedoc, Occitan. And it's the songs of the troubadours of the Qatar people, or the Albigensians, Albigeois. And I understand. I happen to speak French, but I understood the Qatar French, the Languedoc. And then the professor, I'm just sitting there in a state of shock. I'm like, I know this is so familiar. What the hell is this? And then the professor goes on to say, well, these songs that you're hearing were written by women troubadours in the enlightened era of the Qatar, south of France, 11, 1200s. I'm like, whoa, what? This was news to me, that women were composers, were...
I'm amazed myself. I don't think I had ever heard you tell this story, Alx, and you must, of course, immediately put me in touch with this music. That's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. I stole the cassette. I still have the actual cassette from that class. And I used to listen to it over.
So Alx, you're pronouncing it Qatar. So I've been pronouncing it wrong all this time. I was always saying Qatar, but it's Qatar.
Oh, no, Qatar. The name Catherine, Katerina, comes from
Qatar. Okay, well, I stand corrected.
It's, well, when you speak French,
Yeah.
But yeah, so, or the Albigeois, or the people of Occitan. And I was so thunderstruck by these songs that have remained from these phenomenal women, and not just one or two. And then my professor at the time explained a little about that period in history, and he explained that it was an incredibly enlightened time, that women were equal in the society, as, let's say, we were in a music class, so composers, and so on, but they were also clerics. I'm like, whoa, 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 hold the phone. Where was this place in Europe where women were clergy? What? I was so enamored of this. I had no idea. Oh my God. So, and it turns out a little bit earlier in my history, still in high school, I had a whole series of French historical novels where they were set in the time of Louis XIV, so the 1600s, a little bit later than the Albigensians, but they kept referring back to these amazing people of southern France who were so learned. They were at the crossroads of the Moorish culture, which, as you know, was incredibly advanced, and came up through southern France, Spain, northern Italy, and gave things like, algebra and higher mathematics and, sewage and stuff like this to these otherwise totally barbaric Europeans. Well, at the crossroads of also the spice trade, also the crossroads of all the world knowledge was coming through this area. This is why, like, you see the Catalan people, the Occitan people, all those southern areas are still, they're kind of their own people. And all this came out in this class, and I'm like, wait, what? Came out in these French novels that I was reading at the time.
Wow, Alx, if I could just offer in quickly here that the time period you're speaking of, the actual accurate history of chivalry, Templar chivalry, Templar esoteric knowledge, is because of this infusion of Sufi, Saracen. This is what was expressing itself in the Qatars, in the Languedoc, and what became just an unacceptably magnetic and irresistible movement as far as the centralized Roman Church was concerned. There's this really tragic quote. There's two quotes actually on it, which when a nobleman in the region was asked by the Pope, and the French nobles, the Pope had gotten to ally with him in the horrific Albigensian crusade, which was simply a genocide of the Qatars. we'll offer you their lands and you get their castles if you just help us exterminate them. And he said, we cannot. We know these people, they live lives of perfection.
That's it.
Well, they found, some other ones who were willing to do it. And it's also the source of the infamous quote, how can we tell the good Catholics from the Cathars? Because, said, well, kill them all and let God sort them out. God will know his own. Right. So it's perhaps one of the many stains on the centralized Church of Rome. The Albigensian Crusade is perhaps the worst.
Yes.
And it led to the Inquisition.
Yes.
They ruthlessly exterminated Cathars. We're lucky to have what we have, which is why I'm so amazed to hear of this music, which I absolutely must hear as soon as possible.
You have to. It is astounding.
Yeah.
I tell you, it flipped all my switches on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask just one more thing.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm trying. What are the exact, if you can give this, time period, like from this and to that,
Well, so here's the thing that I didn't know. Reading the historical French novels where they were hearkening back to these enlightened people, hearing this music that was hearkening back to exactly that time. And the piece that I didn't know was that the whole thing originates with the idea that Mary Magdalene came to France, to the south of France. The Qatar people were those people who worshipped the mother as a religion. They considered themselves Christian, but they did not consider themselves, Roman Catholic. And hence the south of France particularly had its own identity and its own belief system, much, I would say, closer to the original teachings of Christ, which are coming out of India. The whole missing piece to me of the Magdalene story in France, all of this was they were worshiping the Mother Divine, and they were in many cases worshiping Magdalene as a embodiment of the Mother. So you could say this probably came from the original, let's say 2,000 years back, and came to a head in the 1100s and the 1200s, particularly when the Roman Catholic Church launched, I think, a couple of crusades against the Qatars. One of them was repelled, and the second one was a total wipeout. And oddly enough, Michael, I know you'll appreciate this. Do you know anything about Francis of Assisi's mother?
Yes, that she was actually from France, and that the reason he was originally supposed to be named, I think, Giuseppe, and that by the time partly it was because his father was a merchant, was going to France to get materials, but it was also through his mother's influence that he was named Francesco. So Francis, is now a very common name, but only because of Francis of Assisi, as far as I can tell, right?
His mother was from the south, and she apparently sang troubadour songs to young Francisco when he was a boy.
That makes all the sense.
Lineage. She came from the lineage of mystics who worship the Mother. So hardly a surprise, is it, that he turns out to be, as it were, taught by nature.
Right. And, that worship of God as the Mother is something that I actually found. There was a Facebook post that I put up today in advance of our program on, and I decided to just go with historical material, right? And so I include the Gnostic Gospels. And so I have a quote here, and this is from the Gnostic Gospel of the Pistis Sophia, which when they, you look at it in Wikipedia, and they have a quote from the Magdalene talking to Jesus about interpreting the wisdom of the Pistis Sophia. And they have a little asterisk and parentheses from Wikipedia saying, conventional mainstream Christianity does not have an additional deity called the Pistis Sophia, but is monotheistic. I was like, okay, I don't think they had that simplistic a notion. Reminds me of this quote about Hinduism, where I forget who it was, Toynbee or somebody said, the average Hindu villager has a more sophisticated concept of God than the Archbishop of Canterbury does. So this is kind of what we've got here. But I just want to briefly share this quote, which is Jesus says to Mary, and this is from the Gospel of the Pistis Sophia, "Well done, Mary, you are more blessed than all women on earth, because you will be the fullness of fullness and the completion of completion." Simon Peter, annoyed at Mary's dominance of the conversation, tells Jesus, "My master, we cannot endure this woman who gets in our way and does not let any of us speak, though she talks all the time." Mary defends herself, saying, "My master, I understand in my mind that I can come forward at any time to interpret what Pistis Sophia, divine wisdom, has said. But I am afraid of Peter because he threatens me and hates our gender." And this is from a Gnostic gospel, folks. This isn't some, feminist New Age invention. Jesus assures her, any of those filled with the Spirit of light will come forward to interpret what I say. No one will be able to oppose them. Please note that she says to interpret what Pistis Sophia has said, and he replies, with the Spirit of light, you will come forward to interpret what I say. In other words, the identity of divine knowledge with the divine feminine, and of course the Heavenly Father, to whom was his personal relationship of father that comes up so often. So I just wanted to add that in.
Well, the plot thickens that Christianity actually has a huge pantheon, and it's hidden in plain sight. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, what is that? Did you ever wonder about that as a kid in Catholic school? Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit, what is it? This ineffable force of something. Well, if you look at the Hebrew and if you look at the Aramaic, it's Shekinah. What is Shekinah? It's her. It's father, mother, kid. Oh, well, that makes more sense, doesn't it? That's how the natural world looks. Of course, the supernatural world would be organized the same way. She's been there the whole time in Christianity, the divine mother, without anybody having any idea. It's hilarious to me. It's just so utterly ridiculous how the aspects of the feminine have been swept aside in the way, actually, that the veracity of Magdalene. I mean, you hear these Jewish guys, these unwashed, kind of righteous, dogmatic Jewish guys who were some of Jesus's students in the Middle East. They're like, this woman, she's driving us crazy. Get her out of here. Yeah, of course she is. They were all raised by Jewish mothers who I'm sure were also overbearing and never gave them a chance to talk. And that Jesus, according to Kalashwar, so Kalashwar and Jesus couldn't be closer as souls. And Kalashwar actually remembered his lifetime very clearly with Jesus and told us quite a lot of things about what went down, much of it that is not in alignment with the conventional Christian texts, of course, or that vaguely is, but is a lot more elaborated on. Anyway, one of the things that Kalashwar had to say to us was, his inside circle were women. They weren't men. His 12 disciples, the inside 12, were not men. They were women. And as we know, whoever writes the history is usually the one who won the war. So we can deduce who won that skirmish historically. That the women are written out and a little bit sidelined, and Magdalene herself is kind of, diminished in certain types of ways.
Yeah, and that comes through actually in that quote from the Gospel of Pistis Sophia that we just shared,
yes.
Where, we are with Blue Star Rising, the Templar awakening, and as you know, Alx, the Johannine Templars, which means of John the Beloved, which means, John of Patmos, John of the Revelations, but essentially the mystical strain.
Yeah.
And historically, if you look up Johannine Christianity, the encyclopedia will tell you, yes, as distinct from Petrine Christianity.
Yes.
Of Peter, meaning
yes.
of, you're the rock, and here's the keys, and there's the
rock
Roman go.
Right church is founded on. Yeah.
Right, and so it's the centralized, authoritarian Roman church, which once Constantine converted, essentially was fatally compromised with the Roman Empire from that time forward, and Spirit has managed to flow nevertheless. The grace of Christ still manages to flow here and there through Catholic saints and all the sisterhoods of service.
Right,
And yeah, despite the fact that they're still compromised with being the remnant of the Roman Empire, one of the most corrupt institutions of all time, which
well, and
yeah, go ahead.
I have to reflect on Peter, Jesus, you get it in the Gnostic Gospels too, but definitely he is hilarious. I mean, he's one of the funniest characters I think this planet has ever seen. And, Peter was such a firebrand and such a kind of lunatic. And so kind of unstable, right? I mean, he's the one who grabs the sword and cuts the guy's ear off in the garden, right? I mean, he's always ready for the fight, And Jesus looking at him saying, yeah, this is the rock that my church is founded on. Everybody takes that as in a pious way. Oh, Peter's the rock. I'm like, he's being ironic, you guys. He's
got a rock head.
Rock.
I'm struck by something you're saying about the feminine apostles. I mean, the inner circle, because I guess it was 2004 or 5 or something like that, and I still have it on my old website. Those gave me the names, according to what I received, of this circle of women that were with him. And he's speaking more about the time after his death, but he doesn't say that that's when they were formed. They were there the whole time. So what you're telling me is kind of a confirmation of that. And then there's just one other thing about the in something that I wrote again around that time, but I recently just finished a video on it. I'll be sharing another time. But in it, he said, in the year of our Lord 1216, the sisters of the Magdalen reestablished themselves formally once again and returned to the Temple of Venus in France. This time as a group of 13 women. Anyway, I just had to get that in there because it fits the time period that you're talking about.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and actually, that is right at the beginning of the Albigensian Crusade, of the massacre of the Cathars, which took place, I think, sort of like 1230, 40, 12 in there.
And it lasted in some places in France for like 40 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was. And then there were like the climactic battles that everyone knows about. For example, you'll know the name; it's escaping me. The tragic
Montsegur. Yeah.
Yes.
This
is the last stand, and which I was like, I dare not even go there. I mean, it just affects me so deeply that I can't even go. See it.
I know. I drove by it. I thought to go, and then I thought, no need. It's okay.
Yeah, there's one. What little we know, because they were so effective at exterminating the remnants of Cathar culture.
Wow.
Yeah, what little we know, because they hunted it down for centuries. It gave rise to the Inquisition and the burning of thousands.
So what happened, in my understanding, is that the office of the Inquisition was begun during the Cathar genocide. We associate it with the Spanish Inquisition of the 1400s, but it began in the Cathar genocide. And like the Nazis, it's so interesting, isn't it, how thorough they were in their record keeping of interrogations before they killed many of the Cathar people, that the only reason that we know some of the things that the Cathars believed and practiced is because of the records that were kept by, unfortunately, the Office of the Inquisition of the Catholic Church as they were torturing these folks. So it's also questionable, like, how much did they really say, and how much did they keep back, and how much did they fabricate in an effort to get out of the torture? It's a little bit unclear. And but that, because they kept the records, it's really scary. But I will say this too, that Cathar culture simply, it didn't die, it went underground. And there are many villages in the south of France. Yeah, I don't know how many people actually know this, but in the south of France, in many places, the native tongue is the first language that people learn still to this day. It's Occitan. It's not French. It is that older form of French. The Languedoc, or the language of Oc, is that one of those regions in the south of France where Occitan is still prevalent. In the villages, you'll find older people who their first language was Occitan.
Well, yeah,
so they kept an oral tradition in many of the churches in those areas that they tell their whole tradition all the way back to Magdalene. And they don't say it to outsiders.
Exactly. And there's
And also I want to go a little bit more on that, I'm sure you're aware, and many people are probably not aware, because we tend to think of nations as homogeneous now in our modern age, but there's always been this split between the south and the north of France. That those Southerners, they were blessed with a lot of wealth. They were blessed with incredible, I mean, it's a temperate climate like it is here in California, it's Mediterranean. They were enjoyers, you know, they grew a lot of grapes, and they had the vineyards, and they had the wealth, and they had this incredible cross-pollination between all the different cultures that were coming through on the trade routes. They were enlightened. This is where the idea of courtly love developed, which I think also led to the chivalry ideas. This worshiping a woman that you couldn't have from afar. Usually these were married noble ladies. They had crap tons of money, which the Northern French did not appreciate. The Northern kings were not down with these Southerners holding so much power, and were constantly trying to erode and divert and crash the amount of power, because they didn't trust the fealty that the Southern lords had sworn to the Northern kings. So there was this dynamic tension between North and South France, and it kind of, over the generations and the centuries, the Qatar culture attained a kind of mystical respect from a lot of people who noticed that divide and were very interested in the differences in the cultures. So that exists today, but one of the most famous examples of this is Cyrano de Bergerac. If you know the play, the whole thing is a commentary on the values of the Southern French, i.e. what came out of Qatar culture versus the Northern brutish, uncultured characters. Cyrano is a product of the South. He's a poet. He's a philosopher. All of his friends are. They're all steeped in Qatar culture. These usurpers from the North are like coarse, dumb, idiot, you know, they don't even bathe, and they couldn't write their way out of a paper bag if they had to. It's still in that same divide and that same feeling and the same essence of this difference between North and South. And the South, again, I have to say, all of it was that they worshiped the mother. Very interesting. In India, the South is mostly belongs to the mother. The North belongs to Shiva.
Ah, well, in the South, isn't there a tradition of the temples of Isis, the mystery schools of Isis in the pre-Christian era as well, right?
Many, and many of them, those remnants, which we saw a lot in the south of France, and stunning, I mean, on full display in many of the southern French cities. Those places that were sacred to Isis, I think probably before had been also Kali temples and sites. You know, the mother goes back, and predates all of our quote unquote civilizations. And the worship of the mother and the understanding of the mother goes way.
Right, and it does so, you know, at Notre Dame, of course, if you trace back, you know, the history in Paris of the original temples there. In Assisi, for example, when I went to Assisi, I was there for like 5 days for a conference on the Divine Feminine, an interfaith conference on the Divine Feminine. And I went walking through and saw this ancient Roman temple still standing there in the middle of the square between the basilica and, you know, the inn and the restaurants. Here's this ancient Roman temple to the goddess, which is, of course, 1,000 years ago and more, converted to a Catholic church. So you walk in and they have a lot. You know, I was raised Catholic. I've been in a whole lot of Catholic churches in my life. And of course, there's the crucifix and usually a life-size figure. And, you know, and I revere the reality of the crucifixion and the resurrection. Well, that particular church, Catholic church in Assisi, over the main altar, this former temple to the goddess has Mary crowned, the stars over her head. It's just unabashed. There is the mother. And of course, you know, it's a Catholic church, and so there's a crucifix, but the dominant image in that church in the main square in Assisi is the mother.
Of course. It's so funny to me how this is the other big hidden, I would say, crime against humanity about Jesus, that he was like this with mother, as specifically as Kali, as Mahakali. He worshipped Mahakali. Not only worshipped her, but he was like Sri Ramakrishna, totally in union with her and in communion with her and taking his orders from her and negotiating with her of humanity. He channels to the mother, which you can only get in India. And that's so interesting to me, like how that was all just excised from the conventional Gospels. We see it a little bit in the Gnostic Gospels. In the manuscripts from India, it's perfectly clear. It's astoundingly clear.
Okay, so bringing this up brings up a point that came up for me earlier. I wanted to, when we talk about Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, the great saint of India of the late 19th century, who was this phenomenal virtuoso of spirituality who attained union with the divine through like a dozen different traditions and lineages and disciplines, going fully into, in Christianity, in Islam, in 12 different approaches to God within Hinduism. And so his profession was he was a priest in the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. And I've been to that temple, and of course they have the room where he was a priest is preserved as a shrine. And my understanding is, he was, as a youth, arranged a marriage, and Sarada Devi,
Sardama,
thank you, Saradama. When it came time, he said, behold, this body belongs to you, but I cannot live the sex life. He had already, attained such a high degree of samadhi, and she said, am I the woman to degrade you? No, I will be your disciple. So when you talk about your realization, when in a mystic vision you saw Mary Magdalene after the resurrection encountering Christ and moving to embrace him, you said, oh, they were married. What is your understanding in terms of, okay, we have, like for the example of Lahiri Mahashai, the guru of Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, who had children. And then when he was given his full yogic mission by Babaji in 1861 to share Kriya Yoga again, that, he pretty much remained awake in samadhi 24/7 and did not resume a normal marital life. So, which is not to say, of course, that supreme cosmic consciousness embodied, in a human being means that, the sacred energies of sex and the way that these can be shared in, in a profound energetic way are inappropriate for these great souls. But I know that when we're talking about the Magdalene, and for many of our audience, it's going to be, okay, well, they were married, but was it, a companion? I mean, the Gospels refer to her as koinos, the Greek word for companion. I mean, do you have, what is your particular take on that?
Well, I have a lot, actually. And I think, let's start with Ramakrishna. He was pretty whitewashed by his students and those who wrote the histories about him. You have to remember, context was that this was Victorian England was occupying India. And there was a lot of the mystical traditions, of all traditions. It doesn't matter. It's Sufi, Kabbalah, the Vedic mystics. It doesn't matter. But they don't, when they're awake, the rules don't apply. And with respect to Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, there's a lot more there than the conventional stories. To suggest that he was a celibate, I think, is bordering on absurdity. And I know that the classical view of him is he was, all these things. If we look even at the conventional Gospels for a moment, which are not my favorite, but the Fab Four, as I like to call them, they reiterate, Jesus was like man in all ways but sin. Well, sex is, since I looked last time, is not a sin. It's a natural part of human life. Is it on an altar and obsessively, addictively, something that they do over and over and over and over again, trying to get to the bottom of how much pleasure they can have? But to suggest that they're purely celibate, I think is such a stretch. So with respect to Jesus, I'm trying to put this in a delicate way because it's a delicate subject, and the West goes crazy when you mention tantras, so I don't want to go there. Dan Brown notwithstanding. There are those levels in mystical understanding that if somebody is truly physically a celibate, they won't get the ultimate enlightenment. They can't get it. It's not possible. Now, does that mean, again, somebody has, a married life and they go through all like that? No, it doesn't necessarily mean like that. But there are, in the traditions of India in particular, and since we're talking about Indian yogic training, there are those initiations that occur, especially for the male saints, that have to come through a female. It must. And it's a dicey, delicate subject, especially when we're talking about such a one as Jesus. But nonetheless, with respect to Mary Magdalene, it is unclear to me, and it's part of my ongoing research. So in my own story, I was in India living in Penukonda, going very deeply into the mechanisms of Mother Divine, having direct experiences with Mahakali, grace of Sri Kaleshwar and the saints. Then my then partner Jonathan and I went to France for a while in Paris, and we were meditating in the Magdalene Church in Paris, which is quite a scene. It's like a Roman temple, giant, ridiculous thing that Napoleon built to his own greatness, and then later they had the afterthought to make it to Magdalene. It's so weird, but anyway, in that church they say they have a fragment of her bone. They have some relic of Mary Magdalene. Well, we were a little interested in that, and I remember sitting maybe 20 feet away from it. They keep it in a little reliquary on the side of the altar. You can't get that close, but and meditating very deeply, opening the channels to the Mother to see what is the energy here. What is this real? Is it not real? What's the feeling? And it was pretty powerful, I have to say. So we go back to India, and there's this knock on our door. We all have like little apartments in a building on the temple complex in Penukonda. Knock, knock, knock. And I'm thinking, it's one of our friends coming to borrow a movie on DVD or something. And it's Swami Kaleshwar. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's a little weird. What's he doing in our room? This was not an everyday occurrence. And he comes in and he's all kind of avuncular. And I'm like, okay, this is really weird. And so we're sitting there like, okay. And then we started to tell him about our trip to Paris because that had just happened, right? And we had done some teaching and some healing there, which was quite powerful. And so we're telling him that. And then I mentioned the Magdalene Church because there was a statue of Jesus there that was super powerful. More like the way Swami Kaleshwar described him, less like you see him in many of the churches. He was powerful and strong and rugged. And I was like, oh, you might like to see this photo of the statue. I had the book from the church, and then somehow we mentioned this piece of bone that they allege that they have in this church. And Kaleshwar looks at me and he says, do you think it's real? And his face is inscrutable, and I'm thinking, wow, what is this? This is interesting. And both Jonathan and I said, well, it was powerful. Whatever it was, yeah, I'm going with yes, it's possible. Because I wasn't unaware of the history of, or the stories of her coming through France and like that. And I thought, well, if she did in fact drop her body there, then why wouldn't they have bones and whatever? Okay, sure. And then he says to me, again, with this penetrating look, what do you think her relationship with Jesus was? And I'm thinking about 800 million things in 1 nanosecond. And one of the things I'm thinking is, why is he asking me this? What is he wanting me to remember? Why me? Did I have a role in that lifetime? He never did anything at random, and it was usually multiple levels of chess in one move. So I'm trying to see all 10 moves, And I'm thinking, what do I know about their relationship? And what do I think? And how is this all? Like, all this is happening in a split second. And I responded by saying, well, I think she was both, I definitely think they were married. And I think she was a teacher to him on one level and also a student of his on another. And he's just looking at me, like clearly transmitting and setting some kind of energy channel there that I didn't understand for a long time. Okay, interesting. So years later, and I think I want to show some of these palm leaf books so you get an idea of the manuscripts I'm talking about while I'm talking. So I'm going to screen share. I just have a few, but they're really deep, and they are from 2,000 years ago, and you can make your own deduction about who wrote this palm leaf book. But this palm leaf book is all in the energy of Mother Divine, very, very strongly. And, or mostly, it's mother and father, actually. So it's how the male and the female energies combine on this planet. And let me find, where is okay, hold on. Close this. Let me again try to screen share, and then I'll see. So this is a yantra of Mother Divine. This is a 2,000-year-old palm leaf book. This is Mother showing her all her forms as nature, totality of nature. This is ancient technology about who is she, how do you access her. She's the only one who blesses the miracle abilities to people. Anytime you see a saint who is carrying real miracle abilities, not just a few cheap tricks that they picked up through mantra, it means they've seen her in person, they've interacted with her in person, not a dream, not a vision, not a meditation, and they got that blessing from her. Here we're seeing she's part animals, she's part humanistic, she's carrying the whole kind of womb of creation. She's all the insects, the birds, you can see everything coming off of her. This is an ancient commentary on her structure. I think many people know the traditional Sri yantra, the 5 angles down, 5 angles up, symmetrical yantra that is like the womb of Mother Divine. It's where the whole creation is originating. Adi Shankaracharya was very famous for having gotten that structure from her and placing it at all the major temples in India. This is, at the center of that yantra, there's a single dot that is called the Nada Bindu. Nada means sound, vibration, there's no form. Nada means the Shiva energy. Bindu means point, location. Now we're somewhere in this creation. That's her. This yantra, also from that same palm leaf book, is the structure of the point. It is the creation point. It is the life and death point. It is the place through which every soul will pass, coming into this world and going out of this world. And you'll note that at the center of it is the Star of David, the upward facing triangle that signifies Shiva, the male energy, the downward facing triangle signifying the mother or the feminine. This again, so this is like 2 halves of a palm leaf book. You can see the hole on the side is where they would put a string through it as they stacked all the palm leaves together. This book is both. It's half, so these are full pages put together to show there's Mother on one side and there's Shiva on the other. This whole book at Parameshwari Yoga is about how to access Mother Divine directly. The whole book is nothing but Shiva and Shakti and the technology of them. And everything, all the letters, all the writing there is nothing but mantra. They're all formulas about how to access her, how to gain her energy, how to understand the life and death cycles, how to understand who is she as a creatrix and also who is she as the one who's making the whole illusion world. And who is the Shiva, the God the Father energy that can slice through all the Maya that she's fabricating and get to the clarity and the enlightenment through that pure silence of the Shiva. So Shiva's on the left, Mother obviously showing all her chakras there is on the right. Here's a close-up of her. So again, this book is 2,000 years old. And you can see all the different mantras on her different chakras. Even the petals around her different chakras, everything is mantra. Everything is mantra. They're all formulas, how to go into her energy, how to access what she has to share with humanity.
And Alx, do you want to share a little bit about these palm leaf manuscripts, documents that have actually been examined and verified, right, as being 2,000 years old?
Yes. Well, yeah. So there's one book this is really a kind of crazy, controversial thing to say, but I think it's important to say it. So Kaleshwar, he collected palm leaf books. He had a knack for getting them. And he also had a knack that saints throughout India would hear about him, and they would come and bring him a palm leaf book that had been in their lineage for centuries, sometimes millennia. And they would say, we know that you know how to operate this book, so please would you do us the honor of taking it. Astounding, actually. So there is one book that is directly written by Jesus himself when he lived in South India. And I can say that with utter truth. And that book in particular was carbon dated by the Indian government and verified. Yes, in fact, it was 2,000 years old. And we were learning directly from that book. In that book, Jesus wrote, like all the rishis wrote, in a mixture of Sanskrit and local languages, including Telugu and Kannada. And he said very clearly, my name is Yesu. So in different parts of India, he was known by different names. And he traversed India from full north to full south. He went from Kanyakumari in the south all the way to Himalayas. He went all different places. He learned from different masters. And 3 of them were women, very famous, unbelievable Bhairavi Matas, the highest caliber of female saint on this planet, who educated him in the mystical traditions. So he had many, many, many masters. And he said, this is what I learned. These are how the miracles operate. These are exactly the practices I did, and so on. When Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code came out, you know, that was a big thing, right, when that hit humanity, based a little bit on the great conspiracy theory of Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Right.
Some of which is accurate, some of which is just, you know, it's a great science fiction story, but set with a historical, mystical setting. Anyway, when that came out and caused a big stir, of course, Kaleshwar was talking a lot about Jesus at that time, and he said, well, they got a page of the palm leaf book correct. He was, in fact, married to Mary Magdalene. Okay. So one night we were sitting in this very Jesus temple here. You can see where the heart flower garlands are. Kaleshwar had students who were protecting and refurbishing and taking extreme care of these palm leaf books. They are a treasure to humanity. They're like straight angelic knowledge about how everything works. And some of them have been lost and some of them have been damaged. So he had a whole group of students that he was training how to repair them and take care of them and so on. And he said one night, we're sitting there, I think it was around Christmas time. He said, go get them. And they looked at him and he said, all of them. They were like, whoa, okay. So they all scurried off, like maybe 15 people. And they returned with all these backpacks. And they proceeded to put them on the floor, like basically right in front of the big boss Jesus, there where the things are. It was a pile like, oh, I don't know, maybe about 6 feet long and about 3 feet wide and about this high off the ground of palm leaf manuscripts. I don't even know how many. They were unbelievable. And the light emanating from them was stunning. I mean, it was visible, and I don't usually see things, right? And then he said, go ahead, ask me anything you want about Jesus, which we had been waiting, some of us, for years. Every time he would start to talk about Jesus, he would see it wasn't right. We couldn't handle it. It would get distorted or weird, and so he would just change the subject and he wouldn't answer questions. So we fired them all that night, and among the questions were, was he married to Magdalene? Yes. And then did they have children? Yes. And Kaleshwar said, Jesus had many children, not only with the same woman. Sounded like he and Magdalene had a number of kids, not this one Sarah that people like to make the whole thing about France and they came with this one daughter and la 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 la. No, I don't, there were more. And we asked him, were any of his children exceptional? And he said, absolutely not. They were ordinary human beings to a person.
Well, you know, I just have to say something here. I just have to. Because many years ago, and this is, I based, you know, the whole Johannine doctrine and everything on it, those told me, and I was aware that people wrote about, you know, him having a lot of children with Mary Magdalene and everything. So at first I was like, what am I going to do with this information? Because it just doesn't fit. But he told me that, you know, now I don't recall, it's so much long ago, and I have all these papers and everything, that he ever said they didn't have sex. But I do recall he said that they had one child, and the child was conceived in Iona after Jesus went through the process and came back. And they had this one child that Mary named John Martinus. Martinus because Martinus was the Greek man that escorted her to Iona. And she came back to France, and she did her whole France thing. So I know that just sticks out like a sore thumb. However, Thoth also said to me that at the time of crucifixion, that was when the actual time tsunami that took place in Atlantis actually had its impact at the time of crucifixion of Jesus. And the timelines were shattered then, certain timelines. And he indicated, you know, some timelines, Jesus died, sometimes he didn't. You know, there were different things that happened on these fractured timelines. So he gave me the story of the John Martinus thing, so he wanted me to go with that story. So I have. I guess it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I was watching this show on, he's called The Naked Archaeologist. Have you ever seen that show? He's not really naked, but he's a Jewish fellow in Israel, and he covers everything, including Jesus and the whole, you know, very, very, he's very objective, you know, and he was following historical documentation of a certain branch of family of Jesus's family, who when Jesus was crucified, they needed to really leave. And so this particular group went to Majorca. And so he went to Majorca, and he found that the stone that says, here, the family of, you know, there's a real stone there that says this. And so he went to the house and talked to some of the members of the family. Well, the interesting thing is that these people, they're Jewish, and they don't even believe that Jesus was anything special but a prophet, okay? And yet they do say, oh yeah, he was our, you know, we descended from him. And so then the patriarch had just recently died, but they said the patriarch told us that Yeshua had one child. Well, I'm pretty sure they said one child, and his son was named John. So that's the only place that I have any connection historically to this. So I'm not pushing this. I mean, I like to think that I'm open enough to say, well, there's a lot, maybe we have a lot of different stories that are all true, or maybe it's not true. I don't know. But since 1980, you know, I've received repeatedly from Yeshua that this is Yeshua from Thoth, got my people mixed up, from Thoth, that this is the story he wants to tell, he wants to present. So I do. And that's the reason actually that the Johannine comes about for me. And when the original Johannine wellspring and all of that was because not of John the Apostle, although he certainly plays a role in it, but of John, this child of Mary and Yeshua. And he also says that, you know, some of the names given for the other children are actually grandchildren of John. And when he married, and actually I think he had, first wife died and he had another wife. So, you know, it's just another story, but I have to mention it here because people follow my stuff and they're hearing everything. And so I just need to bring it up. That's all.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I could respond a little bit on this.
Sure.
That we have this dilemma, and it's a personal dilemma for me as well, because of course I have great respect for Maia's work, the lineage of it, the depth, the coherence of it. I have great respect for Alex's work and lineage and profound knowledge. And I've, studied and meditated long enough to be able to use my own discernment of, my intuitive recognition, or when something lands with me as being, okay, yeah, that feels like truth to me. And then what do we do when we come across, different perspectives from obviously learned, wise disciples of a lineage, of a teaching that have received seemingly irreconcilable perspectives on something that, is not unimportant, and yet it's not essential. Like, okay, these different stories are different components, different facets of a larger truth that none of us are going to be able to see the full spectrum of, especially when we're talking about these avatar great souls, because the very reality of an avatar is beyond us. Being in more than one body, no problem. Being in more than 2-3 timelines, no problem. What's the ultimate point? Are we absorbing the sufficient knowledge and understanding for our particular unfolding in this time, such that we can magnetically pull into our paths the resonating aspects of this truth for us, and embody it, not just go, oh, I'll go down this way. Oh, Jesus was married and had children. Oh, Jesus was married and didn't have children. Oh, Jesus was married but didn't have sex. Oh, Jesus did all these, but then he went to India and had a lot more. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, let's bring it back down to, it's a lot more complex than the standard story. It's a lot more complex than our ability to understand, even if we knew all of it. And, when I am listening to Alx unfold what she received through Sri Kaleshwar, I have this, part of me, both as a Catholic and as a Kriya Yogi in the admittedly conservative Yogananda perspective that he brought forth in the 1930s and 40s, coming over as the long-haired Swami with the turban to mainstream America in that time. I just, I was like, okay, I'm just going to open up, and I encourage our viewers to just look at this, just open up to these different perspectives, feel what lands in me that is magnetized to your own unique unfoldment. And with that, back to you, Alx.
Well, thank you. So I think it behooves us to talk about Dattatreya right now. And I want to say, Swami Kaleshwar said they had many children, and he also made the point that Jesus had children with women who were not his wife, which I'm sure is a colossal shock to dogmatic people everywhere who probably are not attracted to watch this video in the first place. So we're safe. But literally the way that Swami Kaleshwar said it that night was, well, a lot of women threw themselves at him saying, this is verbatim, bless my flower. And he was happy to. So he definitely, this pious version of a celibate Jesus who never went in that direction, I think is naive. And again, I want to say from a point of view of an enlightened master, it's not a sexual drive the way that an ordinary person has a sexual drive. It's in the service of divinity, 1,000,000,000%. And so that's a completely different caliber. They can do it, not do it. They really don't care. And I've seen, also Kaleshwar was married and had a child. And he talked very openly about, well, I've had my life as this avatar, and now suddenly I have a wife in my bed, and that's an interesting experience. He was totally open about everything, like a little kid. He'd just tell everything. His wife is sitting there like smiling, like, okay, well, we're going there. There's no, in the West, we have a lot of shame and a lot of weird concepts about sexuality that you can see why the Indian yogis didn't talk about it traditionally, because it would only play into the weird projections and obsessive quality that the West has with it. There's a great quote actually from Marlene Dietrich, and she said, in the rest of the world, sex is a reality. In America, it's an obsession. And I thought, my God, that is such an insightful framing. My man, part of life. Yeah, go ahead, Maya.
Michael, did I'm just interested in Yogananda. Did he say anything in that realm?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, you're muted, Michael. Unmute, sir.
Actually, Alx and I were talking about this earlier today, that in regard to Mary Magdalene, the 2-volume commentary on the Gospels that is one of the great gifts of Yogananda to humanity, the second coming of Christ, the resurrection of the Christ within you. Mary Magdalene is spectacular by her absence. She goes virtually unmentioned in the entire 2-volume book. And, you know, my own thought about that is that, okay, you have in Yogananda an omniscient avatar. Would he have been able to perceive? Of course he would, the fullness of the story. And again, coming to America, he arrived here in 1920. Okay. Arrived in LA in 1925. Made lecture tours of the Deep South as a dark-skinned man, preaching, you know, and newspapers filled with scandalous lies and smears, you know, free love yogi.
Yogis are coming to steal your women.
Right. Free love yogi wants to steal your women, you know, and of course he was dark-skinned in the racist South.
Yep.
So obviously, you know, to go into the full story of the Magdalene was his primary mission was to show the hidden unity between the teachings of Sri Bhagavan Krishna and Lord Jesus, to show the many references to yogic practice in the Gospels, and you know, many other aspects. It's an astonishingly profound volume. So, yes. So to answer your question, Maya, it's like with the inner earth. Did he know about it? Well, of course he did. One glancing little reference where he says, yes, there were at this time 88 million souls on the surface of the earth. Why did he say on the surface, right? So that's my best understanding.
Well, and I could add to that.
It's a spectacular absence.
Yogananda also, there are accounts from some students who are not SRF, oh my God, how dare they, who mentioned that in talking about Teresa Neumann, the great German stigmatist, she's an amazing character, and a Google search to look at photos of her in the full stigmata are stunning. She had it every Friday all the way through Hitler's Nazi Reich. Hitler hated her, wanted to have her killed, kept trying to bomb her town. Nothing ever happened, of course. She would do the full stigmata every Friday. She would lose tons of weight, which she would regain through the week. She would speak in Aramaic. And Yogananda, when he saw her in stigmata, tuned in with her to see what is she seeing. And she was reliving the entire Passion of Christ every Friday and bleeding all the wounds of Christ, including the crown of thorns and from her eyes and everything. Amazing, miraculous, divine soul. Later, he said to some students, she had been Mary Magdalene in that life with Jesus. And that is why she had that channel, that boon to represent his energy. She was the counterbalance to Hitler. She was in the south of Germany. South is always mother. Always mother. The whole way through the World War II. She died, I believe, in the 60s, finally. She gave tons of healings and blessings and everything. A lot of Allied soldiers, thousands, came to see her in stigmata and took her darshan and her blessing. Amazing. So Yogananda did
heard that. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah.
He let that fall. So he knew exactly. Of course he knew. Hey, he knows Jesus like this, right? Of course he knows who is Magdalene. But the timing, what you're referencing, Michael, you know, the time cycles of the saints coming to America and the West in general to enlighten it had to start with baby steps. The soldier saints had to take little steps. In the height of the Roaring 20s, Yogananda is not going to touch sexuality. Forget it. And the 30s and the 40s and the, oh my God, no way, people couldn't hear this. He couldn't even, in Autobiography of a Yogi, call a Shiva Lingam because people would freak out and think it's sexual, right? That oval-shaped stone in the center of a temple, he's doing verbal gymnastics to not call it a Shiva Lingam. Right. Because one of the meanings of Shiva Lingam is a phallus, and that would send everybody off in their crazy sex projections. So he couldn't do it. It wasn't that he didn't know. He had no permission to say certain things at the time.
Right. He just says representative of infinity. Yeah. Symbolic.
Yeah, right. Great.
Of infinity.
right? He couldn't,
Yeah.
they can't go there. They have to tailor it to the psychology and the relative illusion of the time and the culture. So, you know, we've fast forwarded quite a lot through many saints who have stood on the shoulders of Yogananda since, you know, and building and building and building the understanding. All related, all lineages go back. That's why I think we should talk about Dattatreya, because Mary Magdalene
Oh,
becomes
yes.
much clearer when we talk about Dattatreya. It's of note that here on the side of Jesus in this temple in Pentecost, this is a statue of Dattatreya, actually. So on this side, it's Mother Mary, Indian style, then Jesus. That's Mother Mary, by the way, not Magdalene. Then Jesus, then Lord Dattatreya over here. Who is Dattatreya? I have to say, because then it puts a whole other light both on Jesus and on Mary Magdalene. So I'm going to screen share again because I have photos of Dattatreya, which I think just give us a kind of understanding a little bit of who and what he is. So in the Indian tradition, and I'm sure many people are aware, and you know, Indian tradition, okay, we're using language from a specific tradition, but it's describing universal truths. So you might know this in a different way expressed in your tradition. It doesn't mean it's not, we're not talking about the same thing. So this is Lord Dattatreya. Yes, he was a real character. He actually incarnated. It's doubtful he actually had 3 heads, but his energy is such. In the Indian tradition, they break down God, the energy of God, into G-O-D, generating, operating, destroying. The cycles that form our relative world. Something is generated, let's say a life, right? A soul comes in, it's in a form, whether it's an animal or a blade of grass or a human life. It operates for a while, right? It has a time cycle. And we'll talk also, Maya, if there's time, about the time cycles and the crucifixion. There's a kind of a lot to say about that. So it operates for a while, right? It has relative ups and downs. You know, there's heartbreak, there's triumph, there's tragedy, there's all the things that we go through in our lives. We have money, we don't have money. We have relationships, they don't last because nothing's permanent, right? Everything is operating in the relative plane. And then the destroying. There's destroying means the life form is finished. And so the illusion of that form is finished. And then it goes on to its next whatever incarnation. Normally, these functions are performed by 3 separate characters. That would be Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And all of them, by the way, are under the aegis of Mother. She is the creatrix. She made these 3 characters. She made all these cycles, you could say. However, in our world, they represent, you will often see an avatar who comes, there'll be a Vishnu avatar, generally. Like Padmapada, is that his name? No, Prabhupada of Hare Krishna. He's a Vishnu guy. Clearly, he's a Mahavishnu. He's an operator, you know, and getting people to understand and access God through that avenue. You'll see other characters who are mostly a Shiva character. They're mostly in the silence. They maybe are wearing just a loincloth, something, and they're taking people to God through the silence consciousness. Other people are more of a generator, a Brahma kind of quality. So they have enormous knowledge, unbelievable divine knowledge. Like they open their mouth, it speaks like the Vedas. Okay, fine. So people will come in these kinds of forms as an avatar, meaning as a expressed form of that particular energy. What is unusual about Dattatreya is that he's all 3 in one. He's generating, operating, and destroying. That's the symbolism of the 3 heads and the 3 characters here. So here's a couple other images of Datta. And what is interesting about Dattatreya is that he is the primordial teacher. He is the guru for the entire planet. That means every religious spiritual tradition we can name ultimately goes back to Dattatreya, whether they know it or they don't know it. That's interesting. He's the one who gets the whole understanding of the blueprint of creation from the mother and then teaches it to all the embodied beings on this planet over and over and over and over and over again. And here again that's the Dattatreya statue in Panakonda, a little clearer. So Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are there represented as one character. Why does this matter? Because individually, a destroyer can't understand how the generating happens. The generator doesn't understand the operating function. The operator doesn't understand any of it except the operating. when they come together as one, they understand the complexity and the totality of the mother's creation here. That means this energy, this Dattatreya energy, is a bridge between humanity flailing in the creation of the mother and the infinite unbounded consciousness that lies behind her creation. We need a bridge. We need some way to get from where we start in a human body, in a human life, over to the consciousness side while we're still in the form. And that bridge is Dattatreya. Yeah.
That's really quick. I noticed in both these pictures, now I understand the cow, but the three dogs, there's always three dogs.
Four dogs.
Oh, okay, sorry. 4 dogs. What is that about?
The 4 Vedas. The 4 huge bodies of knowledge from the Vedic culture of India that outline the blueprint of creation. Also the 4 yugas, or the recurring time cycles. You know, like when we talk about Atlantis or Lemuria, these are other time cycles, right, that humanity had. We can call them eons, we can call them eras, we can call them epochs. In Sanskrit, they're called yugas. And the yugas are always cycling from super refined to less refined to less refined to super negative, where we are now, again to more refined. And they keep cycling like this. So they're not like, there's only 4 and that's it. No. They're cycling all the time. The yugas. So the 4 Vedas, the 4 yugas, the 4 directions, there's a lot of resonance in the 4. And it's like a joke to pious India that would put the Vedas elevated. You know, one of the lowest life forms as far as Indian culture is concerned is a dog. And that Dattatreya, who is the character who upends every fixed belief about everything. Nothing is sacred with Dattatreya. Everything is on the table. Everything. That he would have the Vedas cast as dogs at his feet is already a kind of assault on the sacred, deeply held beliefs of devout Hindu India. So Dattatreya is an unusual figure because he's totally unpredictable all the time. You never know which aspect you're dealing with. Is he the kind of Brahma generator character who's so full of knowledge and capable and fiery and spinning, creating some illusion? Is he the operator guy, the very sweet kind of Mahavishnu character who's utterly empathetic and watching all the attachments and helping create more attachments in everybody? Or is he the Shiva who is just cutting all of it in one blow? Fierce, difficult, relentless, helping everybody wake up. The Dattatreya character is unique because you can't get your footing with them. When we call the crazy wisdom figures in the West, they're like Dattatreya characters. There's another word in the Indian tradition, it means avadut. Avadut means a pure unconditional love character who's utterly off the world and doesn't care about the material illusion at all. They are this energy, this Dattatreya God energy cycling all the time. Mahavatar Babaji is a very good example of a Dattatreya avatar. Those stories about him, he's pretty tough. He is fierce. And he's clearly Dattatreya. He's acting as a Datta there. You've never seen such love and you've never seen such harshness, and sometimes delivered in the same moment from a Dattatreya. So
Yeah,
why is
I just wanted to say quickly, Alx, Mahavatar Babaji, and again, Yogananda is probably giving the tamer versions of those in the autobiography of a yogi, where in the chapters on Mahavatar Babaji, you know, the incident of sitting around a sacred homa fire with the great avatar, these sacred circle of avatars themselves in most cases, with the Mahavatar who guides the activities of the avatar. And suddenly Babaji picks up a burning brand out of the homa fire and puts it on the shoulder of a disciple next to him and, you know, burns him. And Lahiri Mahashai, who is there, says, "Sir, how cruel." And he just says, "Would you rather have seen him incinerated to ashes in front of your faces in accordance with his past karma? Yeah. I have freed you tonight from painful death."
That's it.
You know,
I should mention Dattatreya in that way is a shortcut guy. He's straight to the mother. And because he's so unpredictable and wild like that, he's actually shortcutting the karmic burdens of the people. And they don't recognize it because it's so out there, right? It seems so jarring and cruel in that moment. But actually, he
Yeah.
saved that guy's life, right? And saving
Yeah.
him from horrific
We
crimes.
had, in fact, that sort of filtered down into ashram lore when I was ashram cook at the Lake Shrine in the early 90s before the new temple was built. And so it was unusual that a lay disciple would be cooking for the monks. It was a full-time job. Usually it would have been like a postulant, some young monk, but they didn't have one. So it was me, and I was very, felt very blessed to be there. But if I'm cooking and spill some oil, or something that splashes, I get burning oil
Yeah,
on my arm. The tradition was you just say, "Oh, thank you, Babaji."
that's right. That's
Thank you,
right. So
Babaji,
karma,
because you're right, and you're on holy ground. You're in the service of the Guru,
yes,
and you have been burned. That's just
yeah,
like, okay, thank you. I didn't have to go through 12 lifetimes of suffering. Instead, I got a little, veggie chicken oil on my forearm. Yeah.
yes,
Thank you, Babaji. Yeah.
yes, 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 and it's absolutely true. Uh, so there's two more things I want to say about Dattatreya. One is that he's legendarily the bad boy of the Vedic characters. And this is so important because Jesus is a Dattatreya avatar. Like 90% he's a Dattatreya. You cannot really, I feel, understand Christ fully unless you understand something about the mechanics of Dattatreya. So Dattatreya, when he first appears, oh my God, he's such a character. He's sitting in the cremation grounds on a burning body, sitting on a dead body, right? This is like the forbidden, you shouldn't do this according to Vedic culture, right? It's weird, it's creepy, it's vampirish or something. He's drinking alcohol, he's drinking bhang, which is the Ayurvedically prepared milk that also has ganja, marijuana in it. He's stoned out of his mind. He's chowing meat and throwing the bones. He has women on his lap all over. He is like using every agent of this material world that you're not supposed to do, right, in a divine way. All the forbidden things, right, like an Agora saint. And what does this do? It infuriates Mother Divine. He's doing it deliberately, actually, to piss her off. Why? Because he wants her to come and stand in front of him. She's like the apex. She's the goal of everybody, actually, on this planet. If you really want to understand the miracle and the supernatural energy, you have to wrestle with her. And she has to come in a fierce form. If you get her in a beautiful form, you get a lot of beautiful illusions from her, and she'll string you along until you die, and then next lifetime. We need to see her as a Kali, enraged, right? So she finally comes. She's so furious with this divine character playing all this nonsense. And she comes to scold him, right? She's furious. His expertise is that he knows exactly how to calm her down, which he does. And then he gets from her what he wants from her, which is how a soul is created. The knowledge, the information, how a soul is made. Nobody in the creation knows this, not even Brahma. Brahma is spinning the souls, but he doesn't have the knowledge how he does it. And all the saints, all the rishis, all the gods, they're furious. They're like, you gave that to him? He's like a frat boy. He never obeyed the rules. We did our sadhana. We stayed in the lines. We only behaved in a sacred way. This guy acts out like the squeaky wheel, right? And you gave him everything. This is the genius of Dattatreya. He is the bridge point between a human soul and the cosmic. He understands exactly how to play the mother. He is the mother. So he's an extraordinarily interesting, unpredictable character. I hope everybody gets that feeling. The second thing that's compelling about him, and that comes again to Jesus and especially to Mary Magdalene, is this. He has famously 24 gurus in nature. Nature is his guru, and nature expressed, and you can find these all over the internet. I mean, I just happened to grab one. Hang on a minute. I have a cat who needs to go out. Here you go, sir. So he has 24 gurus, 24 different aspects of nature herself teach him different aspects of what it is to be an enlightened character. The first 5 are the 5 elements: the earth, the fire, the sky, the water, the air. Sky is also Akash in Sanskrit. It's the space. fine, 5 elements, then the sun and the moon, which actually also form the Ida and Pingala, for those who know that Sanskrit, the subtle nadis, the channels in the human system, leading to the third eye. The sun, the moon. Then a bunch of animals and birds, each one of which teaches him something different about sadhana. And here's like a little list of different things. I love the one about the python, who teaches him that you need to digest the energy that you've received after you do a lot of meditation, in the way that a python will eat its food and then it needs to go and bask in the sun in order to digest it. There are periods for the yogis where they receive a lot of energy and they need to go and not do anything for a while because their process now is digesting. So for example, he learns these different things from the different animals. And then there are 4 human beings who are his teachers. And they are a child, like a toddler, a young woman, like a maiden, a virtuous person, a blacksmith, and a prostitute. And from them, from the little toddler, he learns perfect innocence, like how to just be spontaneous in the moment. From the virgin, the young maiden, he learns virtue. From the blacksmith, he learns single point of focus. And from the prostitute, he learns perfect and complete detachment, called in Sanskrit vairagya. This is really, really, really significant. So I want to mention that about Dattatreya, and then we'll jump back to Jesus and Magdalene.
Yes, just briefly. So we've generally kept our programs to about 2 hours. So I would love if you can share with us some of your experiences on your pilgrimages to France. It's probably what you're about to do.
Yes, I was thinking about that too. Yes.
Okay, great.
So just to say, this concept of Magdalene as a prostitute in the West, we're all like, oh no, she couldn't have been, blah, she's a saint, da, 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 da. Yeah, well, it's a little more tricky than that. And I think where it got distorted was, again, this idea that it requires the females to initiate the men into certain enlightenment channels. Even in Jesus, he needed the female teachers. He needed the female saints to help him wake up. He's born as a brilliant divine soul, but in order to access the channels of energy, it needs that layer of initiation. My personal feeling is she was that for him. And it's entirely possible that got misconstrued in a different light later on. And of course, we know what the Catholics did with that, and they made it a whole, virgin whore split on the feminine and all like that. But I want to share this passage from Kalashwar, which is extraordinarily interesting, and then we'll go to France. So some people know, but some people probably don't know. Kalashwar wrote a book on Jesus. My God. And I'll put the cover of it here on a screen share because it's magnificent. And so, oopsie, hold on a sec. So the book is called The Real Life and Teachings of Jesus Christ. And it contains quite a lot of information from the palm leaf books that we've been talking about and what I showed. Oops, and hold on. Here's the cover of the book. It's a magnificent volume. It's very difficult read. It's not for the faint of heart. And it does, I think, break a lot of belief systems generally. He's talking very openly about Jesus in India. He's talking very openly about the mechanisms of the crucifixion, of the resurrection, and what happened after, that Jesus lived out his life in India into his 80s. He shows many power objects that Jesus used during his lifetime in the book and so on. In this book, he references Magdalene a few times, which I find incredibly interesting. And I wanted to share that as well. Quite briefly, and then we'll go to France. Let me find the passage I'm looking for. I want to read it verbatim because I don't want to paraphrase it. He mentions Magdalene a number of times in this book. He calls her a brilliant woman who helped create palm leaf books, that they had a number of children together. He mentions, seems like that was all post-crucifixion, not pre, also very interesting. And then he mentions this very interesting passage. There is a prostitute who doesn't have food in her stomach and needs to protect her baby. The mother is holding her crying baby. Even she's hungry. She has to make milk for the baby to drink. Then a guy comes with $100. She puts the baby under the tree and she gives satisfaction to the man for $100. That is the reality. That is the spirituality. She needed to take care, so she needed to satisfy someone. It's not the lady's crime. She needed to take care. I'm not insulting the woman's kingdom. I respect a mother's nature. I give 100 marks to the women's kingdom. I pranam, I make full bow to their divine love. I will come back to tell about Mary Magdalene in the 3rd volume of the Jesus books. The first time I read that, like, oh my God, what just happened? What is that? So I'm going to leave that there for now. I can talk a lot about it, but mostly I want to allow for the possibility that the story is more complicated. Like you were saying before, Michael and Maya too, referencing different, timelines and different possibilities and different things and different versions, that the story is more complicated than perhaps we would like it to be. And of necessity, to understand something of the reality of spirituality in this planet, we do need to understand some of it. We can't just brush it aside and say, oh, well.
Yes.
Do that.
Yes. I just want to note briefly, and you showed the cover of the book.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that at the center of the bottom of the cover of the book is a cross of Jerusalem. One of the Templar crosses is and actually I'm wearing one around my neck here, which actually also has some very small container with the ash from Penteconda. And it is that same, it's a cross of Jerusalem. It's the large cross with the 4 crosses in it, which was likely also on the sword of Joan of Arc. She asked, bring me the sword buried beneath the church of St. Catherine de Fierbois, which has 5 crosses. So I just wanted to mention that in passing. I thought it interesting that was chosen.
Well, it's fascinating because Kaleshwar chose every aspect of that book, from the color of the cover to the exact paper it was printed on, to every photograph, to every word that's in it. So if that image is on the cover, that was deliberate.
Very interesting.
From his consciousness, yes.
Yeah.
So let me take you on a brief tour of some of the sites in France. Many people know. So I hope that the concept of this Dattatreya Jesus is somehow penetrating a little bit, that he's a wild, unpredictable character. He was an Avadutta. Many people have hard time reconciling the Prince of Peace with the character who ripped up the money changers in the temple, in the conventional Gospels. Well, it makes total sense if you're looking at a Dattatreya. Their style is to smack, and in that smacking, to wake up the souls. The master of Muktananda, who was a great saint called Nityananda, his way of giving blessing, of giving Shaktipat to people, he was 300 pounds in a loincloth. Let's just let that image sit there. He would hang up in the boughs of a tree, 300 pounds with a loincloth. And people would come begging for blessing and healing, and he would manifest rocks, and he would throw the stones at them and whack them. That's how he gave Shaktipat. Not unlike Mahavatar Babaji with the burning brand, What's he doing? He's literally smacking some karma out of them. He's giving a huge transfer of energy, even though it's this kind of jarring thing. It's very Dattatreya. So Jesus is a Datta figure. It's no shock that the women are around, the romancy. It's a part of the Datta nature, and a part of the illusion that Dattatreya is creating in the world to confuse the minds. Number one, well, spiritual bastards shouldn't do that. Oh yeah, who said? People who find it distasteful, they won't hang around. People who are willing to see through that, they'll hang around. Those are the ones usually that they want to teach. They're the ones who are willing to stand no matter what they see with the 2 eyes and the perception of whatever morality we're coming from. So, yeah, where to start? So I think people know the conventional Magdalene sites at especially St. Maximin Le Sainte-Baume, where they say they have the skull of Mary Magdalene. The first time I went looking, again, Magdalene called me very strongly. And where she called me to were caves in the south and west of France, not the south and east where St. Maximin is. And it just so happened, I have a friend who has a friend who had recently moved there, and his wife is an expert in these caves. They're local, they're not very well known, and they're not considered on the beaten track of the Magdalene energy. They're in the Dordogne. Dordogne is a region of France where all the Thomas have started their centers, including Thich Nhat Hanh. That's very interesting. A friend of mine said, "Oh, you know, the Buddhists consider the Dordogne as the heart chakra of the planet." I did not know this. What is there is prehistory. The Dordogne was a huge glacial-like river, I guess, that created giant prehistory sites of all kinds of preserved fossils and this and that. So there are many digs. The famous caves at Lascaux are nearby. They're part of that region. And you know, those caves were not inhabited. They were ceremonial. There's been contiguous human presence in the valley of the Dordogne for, they estimate, about 500,000 years. So it has a lot of energy. It has a lot of nature, supernatural quality there. And the feeling is that Magdalene came there for some 4 or 5 years. There is literally an archaeological site where they dig in the Dordogne called the Magdalene, La Madeleine in French. And so we went to those caves with this lady who knows very well these caves. And they're on private land, but they've opened them up. And I just want to show you a couple things from that area because it's very powerful. And I'm looking for, let's see, well, it's these for one. And hang on just a second and I will find the exact cave that I'm looking for. Ah, here it is. So this blew my mind because I didn't know what to expect. And we got into the first cave. There's a series of 3 or 4 of them there in the Dordogne. And first off, the Magdalene presence was so strong that it was overwhelming. This is inside one of the caves of the Madeleine. And in the northeast corner, I think, can you see the cursor on the screen? Yes. There was this rock formation that literally, I almost fell down. It looks exactly like a Shiva Lingam from India. And the energy was a Shiva Lingam. And I got closer to it here. It's like a naturally formed Shiva Lingam. You see these in India, you see them around the world. Super powerful. I had no doubt in my mind that she lived here and meditated here, and that they did ceremony to the lingam like we would do in India. Whoa. Meditating in these caves, it was also very clear to me not only that she had been there, but that Jesus too had been there. Ah, here's a close-up on my, oops. Here's a close-up on my Shiva Lingam. I mean, wow, cosmic. So in the Indian tradition, generally they'll bathe these lingams every day. They'll pour water or rose water or holy substances on them. They'll worship the lingam as the energy of the infinity of God. And you get a lot of blessing when you do that. When you're washing a holy object, like a holy statue or a Shiva Lingam or a power object of some kind, you're washing your own karmas, or you're washing the karmas of humanity in the process of doing that, using the water element to cleanse like that. So that was, oh, wait, yes, hang on. Yama.
Could you put that picture back for a minute?
Yeah, of course.
That one. Do you see the face? The woman's face at the bottom, there's a large eye, one eye is covered. There's a nose and a mouth. You see that? I just had
directly on the wall, on the cave wall behind this, was a structure that looked like a statue of a goddess out of the rock. I was like, oh my God. I can imagine 2,000 years ago, it may very well have been, in fact, a carving of a goddess statue to go along here with the Shiva Lingam. To have both represented mother and father there was really powerful. Yeah, interesting. Oh my God. So there was that. That was a shock. And I started, because I really was looking for, where are the links between her life in India and this life that she had in France? Where are these links? How is this translated? And it's also true in Chartres, in the cathedral outside of Paris, which is the best preserved and enormous Gothic cathedral. You know, Goth, it didn't mean Gothic people. The Gothic cathedrals were built by people. Goth was the way of saying secret language in French. They were mystery schools. And Chartres is literally being created in the 1200s at the same time that the Qatar genocide is happening in the south. And it's being constructed on the technology of the Southern French who understand about Mary Magdalene. In the stained glass windows at Chartres, they put all the Bible stories because they were like graphic novels for the illiterate people to understand the stories that they heard the priests tell. So they would often put, you know, like the Good Samaritan in panels in the glass and so on. There is one stained glass window in Chartres Cathedral that is the Mary Magdalene window. And it has different stories of her life with Jesus, washing his feet and so on. And then it has her coming in a boat on a shore. And at the very top of the window, it has her leaving her body finally at the end of her life with the bishop, the Archbishop of Aix-en-Provence, St. Maximus, who was there with her when she died, they say. Somebody in the 1200s in the north part of France wanted Magdalene in France immortally told as a graphic story in that church, right under the nose of the Catholics.
I love that. And you know, Alx, the fact is that there were several Templar Grand Masters at that time who were Cathars. We know this is historically documented. You know, okay, the Templar base is down in the Holy Land. They're far away from, you know, the horrors. They probably did what they could. But, you know, well, for whatever reason, they were unable to interfere. But, you know, the fact that traditionally, of course, the construction of those Marian cathedrals, Chartres, Notre Dame, and others are considered as, you know, Templar constructions, Templar esoteric knowledge. So I love that because, of course, the Magdalene is the protectress of the order, is, you know, focal point of devotion, and they wove the Magdalene in wherever they could under the guise of Mother Mary.
Of course.
Yeah. So just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something. You were talking about, you know, the skull of Mary Magdalene in this, and I guess it was about 2004 or 5 that I was shown what she looked like according to what I received, you know, just putting it in that context. And I used Poser, which is, you know, but I did the best I could. And I did the image and I went, oh, she doesn't look too pretty. And I thought, I don't want to show that to anybody. Everybody has her so, you know, and I was thinking, maybe I don't want to show that to many people. So I did, but, you know, I just kept it aside. Well, just last year, I'm, you know, going through Facebook or whatever, and this picture comes up and I got, my God, that looks like what I just drew. And I looked at it, and in 2017, they did a reconstruction of her face.
Yes.
And I have a picture of mine next to hers. It's unbelievable. Mine's younger. That's about it. You know, I was just blown away. So I didn't feel so bad. I don't say she was ugly or anything, but she just wasn't, you know, the beautiful image that we like to think of her, you know.
Right. It's a very strong image. It was a very strong face.
Yes. Yeah. Well, she's strong, no doubt. I wanted to say too, on the subject of why she's left out of things and how come there's so many different versions about her. She's a very powerful mother figure. And whenever you have the mother divine represented, there's always a lot of illusion that comes with her. A friend of mine was trying to do a documentary on all the different Mary Magdalene channel sources. And she went to a bunch of these very prominent, they're all women. And each one has made a living and a career off of their version of Magdalene, you know, and each one said, oh, I'll participate in your documentary as long as it's only my story. And I thought there's so much illusion around her. You can feel like this swirl of, you can't quite get a feeling, who and what is she? You can't quite get, that to me, my nose says there's a huge divine truth buried at the center of this crazy hurricane swirling around all these different versions and ideas and this and that of Magdalene. And she is very strong. I have photos of the skull, I'll show it in a minute, but I want to finish a little bit of these caves in the south and west because they are super duper. So it's a series of them. They're all next to each other. And then above, they built in the medieval days a chapel. That chapel, holy mackerel. The family who owns the land upon which this place is built, they know very well the history there, and they put a little modern statue of Magdalene there in the chapel. This is part of the chapel there. Wow. And so we all lit candles and we meditated there. And I have to say the transmission is extraordinarily strong in this particular little place. And I'll show you other photos of it in a minute, but that's the statue there. She is dazzlingly simple. And you know, they like to show her with an urn signifying the ointment that she put on Jesus's feet. What's not commonly known is that ointment is named as spikenard, and spikenard is found in Himalayas. So hello, India.
I have some spikenard, by the way, from Young Living, and it's really amazing stuff.
It is powerful. Yeah, so this is that statue up close. And so this is a modern statue. There's nothing antiquated about it, but it tells you that the family knows very well that she is the central character of that whole archaeological site called La Madeleine. And that Madeleine site, I think it's like 20,000 years back, all the things that are deposited in the ground there. It's an ancient site of all kinds of things. So here we all are meditating there. I took a group there on tour in 2018. Fabulous, powerful, beautiful, immaculate energy there. Just below it, and I only have one photo of this room, but there's this magnificent cave. So this is next to the first one that had the Shiva Lingam in it. This one has all these holes in the floor that are stunning. And the feeling in there that I had was that she was using like for oil lamps, like ghee lamps, like for Diwali. It is really amazing how smooth and scooped out the rock is there. It was deliberate, obviously. It's not accidental. And then above it, so this is on the side of a river. So there's a whole wall of caves that face the river. And then if you walk up on top of, there's like a earth ledge. It's all beautiful, ancient, ceremonial place. And there is this pit from some thousands of years ago. Our friends who know this land very well, she told us that some psychic guy had visited there and he saw lines of people in white robes coming for healing in this square formation thing here. They think of it as baptismal. I immediately thought of fire homa. I can't tell you what it is exactly, except it's super duper powerful. And so we all took turns sitting in it and meditating together to receive the energy and the transmission of Christ. It's both Christ and Magdalene, by the way. That was a shock to me. It never occurred to me that he had been in France. But walking in this places, I was like, oh my God, he was totally here with her at some point. It's super clear. So I think you can see the degree of grace and silence there. And in the back is this formation that looks like there was some deity statue in there. It's like a kind of a throne. And we took turns also sitting in there. Is really powerful. My feeling is that it was very powerful, other divine statue there. Maybe thousands of years ago, I don't know. And sitting in that thing was also like receiving a kind of transmission there directly. Really amazing, beautiful, powerful place. So this is in the southwest of France. And it's also, it was a Qatar genocide place as well. We went to many sites where the Qatars had lived and died there, and did a lot of cleanup work on those souls who were still waiting, you know, to be sent back. That was powerful and painful.
Yeah, there's a Qatar ritual, which you probably heard of, Alx, when a person is old and preparing for their transition for death, called the consolamentum.
Yes.
Yeah, where, and of course they understood about, you know, reincarnation and the soul's journey to reunion with the divine, and that there was, you know, the possibility of a final lifetime before complete reunion, and that when death approached, they would engage in this ritual where it's essentially a fasting unto death, as a purification ritual that the consolamentum was, and is kind of akin to what happens in what's it called? So,
Yeah, last rites.
not so much last rites as when, oh, come on, where, they prepare you for death and you're allowed your dying process, not in the hospitals, and it's called
Oh, hospital.
hospice. Thank you. And that, I witnessed that with my father, who, was a wonderful soul and very devout in a universal kind of understanding of his Catholicism. And it just kind of worked out that way. We were told, oh, he's got maybe 24, 48 hours. We all gathered 10 children. And it was a consolamentum. He dragged it out for a week. And we would make him comfortable and moisturize his mouth so he wouldn't, but no fluids, no solids. It's fasting unto death. And we sang, anyway, it's this just touches on one other thing when you're talking about the illusion that Divine Mother casts around her stories, and each, Magdalene, professional Magdalene, mystic channel, tour guide person, whatever, has her own version. It must be only my version because, of course, I've been given the true version. That there is one particular, I think I may have spoken of her to you, Bishop Rosamond Ikshvaku Miller of the Ecclesia Gnostica in Mountain View in California. She has a wild Gnostic experience of such stark, liberated, in your face, don't you dare project your illusion onto the reality that I have touched the hem of the robe of. It's one of the few I have great respect for her, and she is from the south of France originally, was raised in an underground Magdalene lineage, which goes back to the Cathars, and was actually trained to be the first of her lineage to come forward publicly, and just beautiful. I attended a Gnostic Eucharist at her chapel. It's a beautiful chapel, and she has women who she's training to be Magdalene priestesses, and it was just a very beautiful thing for me as having been raised Catholic to see a woman raising the host in the Eucharist. And it happened to be a Gnostic Mass in memory of the martyrdom of the Knights Templar, because it fell exactly on October 13th. And it was like the 718th anniversary, something like of 1307 and the takedown of the Templars. Anyway, we're getting close to where we should probably wrap it up, because our viewers like us for 2 hours.
But I have like a few more photos.
Oh, share them. Go for it.
Little tiny videos of the Magdalene sites. So
please go for it.
Let me show you those. It'll maybe like 10 minutes worth or something.
Go for it.
Okay, so this is that same site there with my crew meditating. Once this group of ladies got in, it suddenly began to rain so lightly. It was so gorgeous, just to give you the feeling of this place. And the rain just started when they were sitting. Really powerful mother ladies, they're all linked to Penaconda. All of the people who were on that tour are very, very strong meditators and extremely strong characters with Christ and with Magdalene. And so it was a little special to be there with them. I want to mention one other place before we get to the Magdalene skull, and that is at Rennes-les-Bains. Rennes-les-Bains is, it's known as a Magdalene site. It was an ancient, it was like a summer place for the Romans because of the nature. And everything there was very strong nature and extremely, how would you say, like, you could really feel the enlivened five elements, and you could feel the presence of Christ and Mary Magdalene there. This place is called the Fontaine des Amours. It's the fountain of love, of lovers. And they have a myth that if two people who have an attraction to each other swim in it naked, they'll end up partners for life. Oddly enough, two of my colleagues met for the first time on this tour. No, they didn't go in naked, but we did meditate there, and they wound up a couple, and now he's moved to Germany to be with her, and they've married and all the rest. So that's a little interesting.
Isn't this near Rennes-le-Château? Isn't this near?
It's near Rennes-le-Château, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's actually in Rennes-les-Bains, which is maybe 20 minutes from Rennes-le-Château. Personally, I wasn't that enamored of Rennes-le-Château. I know there's a lot there. It didn't hit the same chord that this places did at Rennes-les-Bains. And this place this is really off the path in Rennes-les-Bains. You have to know where it is to find it. Unfortunately, we did. It's called the Bénitier. The locals have called it the Bénitier for centuries. Bénitier means a baptismal font. And it's where three tiny little rivers is a loose term here for one who grew up on the Mississippi. They look like creeks where I grew up. But anyway, three intersect exactly at this place, and they kind of form a little whirlpool. And the feeling there is that Jesus and Magdalene used to baptize people in this water. I think it's absolutely true. And I have a little video of it. Let me find that. Unbelievable, this place. Really powerful. And I think you'll feel it even in the tiny little video that I took of it, of everybody meditating there at the baptismal font. This is exactly the place where those three places meet. So that place was a huge transmission also. And while we were there, we were just finishing meditating very early in the morning. Oh my God, it was so powerful. You could really feel Christ there. And of course, her. As we were just finishing our meditation, a young local woman and a dog, young, I say, she was probably 40, but wiry and brown. And she came with her dog, and she proceeded to strip off all of her clothing and go into the water there and make her blessing. And it was cold, and that water was cold. And then she looked up and she was like, oh my God, all you people are here. She said, I do this every morning. I never really have been here when there are people here. And we got the point that it was the Magdalene energy itself showing us how you interact with this water and how it's been done for centuries and millennia since she was there. It was super unbelievable. And she toweled off, put on her clothes, and she and the dog went off. And that's her prayer. That's how she begins every day. This local, beautiful, Magdalene-esque woman. Oh my God. So then finally I have photos of the crypt where the skull is. And wow, what a place. So I did also want to show in that church. So the church was built in the 11 to 1200s, I believe. Again, I know 1200s, right after the genocide had gone through that area. And by a semi-royal guy who had a feeling about Magdalene. Oh, suddenly they just discovered these remains there. Okay, whatever. So they built this church. And inside the church, actually, is this another one? No. Inside the church, there are many different, it's a Catholic church run that way, sort of, kind of. But it has the iconography of Magdalene. And this one, I think, is particular. Is a giant painting on the wall. She looks like an Agori saint here. Like she's carrying a skull, and you often see her with a skull. They have a whole big story about this with respect to the skull. My feeling is it's an indication that she's carrying the Bhairavi Mata channels of India. But she looks pretty wild. She's not pretty demure, whatever people might think Magdalene is supposed to look like. She's in the wilderness. She's, you know, barefooted. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger so you can see a little bit more of her. I mean, that's intense, right? And she's giant. I mean, like larger than life size on one of the walls in that church.
Well, you know, as a dimensional addition to whatever the skull might mean on one level, to me, it also means, you know, about the crystal skull of the Lemurian priestess who became Mary Magdalene from my storytelling. So, you know, has another additional aspect to it.
Interesting. In India, they will say the skull is where the consciousness is residing. There are stories of Shiva sitting in the cremation grounds, God the Father, he's a wild guy too, eating his food out of a skull cup. Indirectly, it says he's accessing the consciousness. Okay, so here's the crypt where the Magdalene skull is, and I will conclude with these photos. I'm not sure in what particular order, but so a lot of mystical things happened when I took my group there. In 2018, and we were like bridging. We were 11 people carrying very strong channels to Penaconda, and it felt like we were making the bridge point again between the south of France and Penaconda that had not been made in maybe 2,000 years. And all of nature was like singing. Everywhere we went, there were crazy, extraordinary events that happened. Crazy winds that came up for 3 days they'd never seen the like of. Crazy rainstorms that came out of nowhere at different sites. I mean, really wild things. In the crypt, when we first went there, it was closed because there was an electrical problem and the lights weren't working. Well, it's underground, so you kind of need the lights, right? Then when we went back, they had jerry-rigged some temporary lighting. Then when we went back, the guys came to fix it and they opened it up. Usually you don't get to see her skull full on. Oh yeah, and my friend was there, German lady, just like brass ones, and she's like, do you mind if I take photos? And the electricians are like, what do we care? So we got photos. So it's kind of amazing. So ceremonially, they take her skull out and they put it in the big gold reliquary thing that it's in, and they march it around the streets. So that means the priests, there are Dominicans who administer the site. They do see the skull, obviously, but the people generally don't get to see the skull. So this is what it looks like when you go down in that crypt. And if you see this grate, there's a whole wall of very thick glass that's locked, and then there's the grate, and then there's glass over the reliquary that her skull is in. So it's very hard to see through this ornate grate. This is meditating in there, looking back at my kids who are all meditating. Then they're all meditating in there. You get the feeling, right? It's very dark and mysterious and magnificent. So you have to go down under the ground in this church. And then, oh my God, they opened it. And oh my God, there she is. And what they say, technically speaking, is that from the jaw piece is not original. That was lost. So this skull was found with some remains also of 2 other saints who they think accompanied her from the Holy Land to France. And there's pretty good documentation about that. So they're also buried in this church. And there are other parts of her that are in the church, but they don't show. It's mostly the skull. And one of my favorite quotes. And then I have others of her skull. Hold on a moment. I will say I went there on the fence about whether this was real or not. And when we first went down in that crypt, my heart started like this. I've had that feeling in the presence of Mother Divine as Mahakali. I was like, oh, okay. Well, if this is Magdalene or it's not Magdalene, whoever this is very, very powerful. And I'm going to go with it's probably Magdalene. How she wound up there, I couldn't say. How she ended up in France from India, I have no idea. But anyway, so this is the outside of that church. And here we all crowded around the crypt. And again, crowded around. And then this is how normally you see her. It's difficult, right? Even if you got up close, which you can't because there's a glass wall. It's tricky through that grate, right?
Why did they do that, Alx? Why did they make it so hard?
I don't know. I guess it's a protection, and it's probably from, like maybe medieval or a little bit later. So they had an idea to, like, you kind of see, but not kind of see. In India, they do that too, especially with another divine statues. Some of them, they close the doors and then they have like a little barred window that you can look in and see in a little temple, but it's part of her mystique, I think. I don't actually know what their explanation of it is, but here the doors are open. And let me make this a little bit bigger too. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, right? And then here's that's like the full reliquary that she's in. They say that here is a little piece of skin, which I'm a little bit on the fence about that too, but they say there's a piece of skin that was like on her forehead where he touched her. I couldn't say, but there is a little rolled up skin wrapped up in there. And, but her skull obviously is the main transmitter there. It is very powerful in that crypt. It is super, super powerful. And the whole church feels like very Kali-esque energy to me. It's wild. It's not a settled mother. And especially in there, it is wild waves of energy pouring off of her.
Well, I'm struck by the beauty of the container.
Yeah.
The angels and it's a beautiful piece of art. Mm-hmm. And I feel just it's so aligned to its purpose. When do you think that was created?
I haven't the faintest idea. I would imagine a Google search would tell us. Mm-hmm. That church is pretty well documented. Yeah, I have no idea when they created that. And here, there's a glass face on it, I'm sure, to preserve. So I don't know when that was put in either.
It has a 19th century look to me.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, let me go back to the big open. It's pretty wild, isn't it? Actually, that other one is better. Let me go to the other one again. I mean, wow, right? Oh, so we were so fortunate. We got to see it like multiple times open. Nobody gets to see it open, man. Like nobody, no way, no how. Nobody gets in to see that wizard. And wow. Oh yeah, here's the big one again. Let me put this one on. It's a much easier way to see it. At least yeah, here. I mean, holy moly.
Mm.
Wow. So she wanted us to see her, was our feeling as a group. She wanted us to have a direct transmission in darshan, and wow. It really did feel on that particular trip that all of nature was saying thank you for being here and bringing India back again. Mm. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And in her cave, actually, there's a big cave called the Sainte Baume. Baume is an old French word for cave, and it's feminine, of course, where they say that she lived out her last 30 years and maybe died there. In that cave, there were also giant rock formations that were very clearly Shiva lingams. Very clear, no doubt. No doubt. Absolutely no doubt. And that's located not very far from here. But yeah, wow. So that's a little taste of her.
Yeah. This has been such an amazing journey and exploration, Alx. I mean, I knew it would be deep and marvelous, but it's even more so. And of course, it makes me want to go to these places, go to the caves, go to Penaconda.
Yes.
And hopefully before too very long, we can.
Yes.
And, for us, I mean, for me particularly, the personal impact of this is strong on just so many levels because, as a Templar, as a Catholic, as a yogi, as a devotee of the Divine Mother, as a devotee of Christ, something came through from Maia not too long ago about the core of what we are doing in the Johannine Templars that is with Christ to lift his living image from the clay. That the Magdalene story does that so powerfully. And of course, it's core to the Templar lineage. And, his living image has been besmirched and confused and lost and distorted And it comes so powerfully to life when we begin to understand the full story. So thank you from my heart
Oh, you're so
for,
welcome.
for
I have
being with us today. This is just such a gift, and it will reach the people whom it is meant to reach.
that's right.
Thank you so
And
much,
so,
Alex. I really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Here's again the Jesus temple in Penaconda. Let me just close with a few pictures that tie it back again to India. That temple is miraculous.
And again, this is
And
India, everyone, that we are looking at. Divine Mother on the left, and Christ in the center, and Dattatreya, who is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva in one.
yeah,
And
Kalashwar teaching in front of Jesus.
ah,
And so communing with Christ before turning around to give a massive transmission of his energy. His final gift to humanity was this statue, a living statue again of Mother Divine in a very fierce but smiling form when she's killed all the negativity. He would say, by the by, and I think this relates very strongly to Jesus and Magdalene, that Mother often is shown with fierce weapons, right, in her fierce forms. Each one is an angle through which to kill negativity on this planet. He would say when she is in her most relaxed form, that is Jesus. He is her final weapon. He is the final weapon of Mother Divine to help cure this planet of its ills. So Kalashwar, right before he left his body in 2012, had this 9-foot statue of Mother installed. And you can see she's very alive. We were throwing lotus petals on her to restore the divine feminine again back to humanity in its proper way. And finally, my final closing images are a Shiva Lingam that is also in Penaconda. That is, hey, guess what? 2,000 years old. And in meditation, I saw very clearly that it was, it had been Jesus's. This is a Shiva Lingam. It's huge. And it's there without any explanation, really. Here's one student putting her head to it, which you can do in Penaconda. And here's the priest making a puja to it. So Penaconda, Jesus, Mother, Magdalene, all of these things are so strongly linked with our Western world and with the consciousness that's coming up on the planet today, especially the consciousness of the Mother. I feel like Jesus, you know, Magdalene was a kind of soulmate to him, not his only soulmate. His mother also was an unbelievable, majestic character, but that they kind of, the two of them together brought the Enlightenment to the West in a way that needs to be part of our story again. Everybody focuses only on her in France, like, oh, she came from the Holy Land, oh, she had to flee because he was crucified, la, la, la. Whatever. She was also in India, and they are the natural bridge between the infinite cosmic intelligence made into amazing shareable forms of enlightenment from India that time and again people have come from the West to go to India, receive it, and then again bring it out into other countries. And I feel like Magdalene is a great ambassadress of that and of the healing. And by the way, in the south of France, they know that she was a healer of renown and that she made herbal preparations that they say they still make in certain parts of the south of France.
There was a wonderful Hindu Anglican rite that took place in St. John's Cathedral in downtown Los Angeles some years ago, and there was a wonderful Episcopalian priest, a woman, who happened to be familiar with my kirtan, and I was invited to lead kirtan in this amazing reconciliation mass of a sort of a formal apology reconciliation for the American Episcopal Church as the descendant of the Anglican Church for the crime of the dishonoring of the divine wisdom in India during the Raj. And
wow.
It was just phenomenal because there was an American Hindu nun and an Episcopalian priest and a kirtan group and a choir and RT in front of the Blessed Mother in an Episcopalian church in downtown Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah, a full RT ceremony puja to the Blessed Mother. It was, yeah. So it can happen, the integration, the awakening, the realization of our enormous, I want to say debt, but it wouldn't be debt. It's just intimate connection. She's our mother, you know? And when you look at the planet and how just geographically India inherits so much of, you know, from Lemuria, being protected by the Himalayas and the oceans, where it's the only place where a living spiritual tradition that goes back, who knows,
Unbroken.
thousands of years is still, yeah, a living reality.
Yeah.
So, bless you, my friend. We are just so lucky to have you here on the planet with us.
Thank you so much, Alx. I really enjoyed having you with us today.
Oh, so sweet, Maia. Thank you so much. It's great to be able to share something of her fragrance and her divine power, you know, especially coming on her day when so many people are thinking about her tomorrow, you know, on the 22nd.
Right. So share this widely, everyone, with everyone you know who is drawn to it, who might be drawn to it. And thank you for being with us. Namaste, namaskar. Mother bless us all. All right, hang out for a minute with us if you will.
Sure.
And we're done. Thanks, folks. Bye for now.